Hello there, little masters, and welcome to the very first Prancing Pony podcast of 2018. Tonight, the good stuff will make your reputation go up a very great deal with the dwarves.
West to Hall, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the frying pan to my fire, Alan Sisto.
Oh, I like that one, Sean.
Like that one,
Thank
too.
you. That's good. Folks, tonight we're going to see Bilbo reunited with his dwarf friends on the other side of the mountains as we start Chapter 6 of The Hobbit, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire.
This is a great chapter. I mean, this is just one of the most memorable ones in the book, and I'm excited because it's going to allow us to revisit a topic we haven't talked about since episode 32, wolves.
Wolves, oh yeah. You know, we've had a lot of fun with that topic in the past, and it's a topic we still get a lot of questions on, so this is going to be a great opportunity to talk about them a bit more. But first, Sean, I think we've got something else to talk about, don't we?
Yes, we do. We want to start the new year off with another installment of This Week in Tolkien History. So this episode is going to be releasing on January 7th. So the big event that we're celebrating this week, of course, is Tolkien's birthday. I guess I should say that a different way. In this week, in 1892, January 3rd to be precise, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born to Arthur and Mabel Tolkien in Bloemfontein in the Orange Free State, currently South Africa.
That's right. And folks, we hope you all had a chance to celebrate that at 9 o'clock on Wednesday night with the annual Toast to the Professor. If you didn't, go do it tonight after listening to this. We won't tell anybody.
No, of course not. Your secret's safe with us. But don't miss it next year.
That's right.
It's a great time to celebrate the professor along with other people all around the world. We've got a few more on This Week in Tolkien History. Also in This Week in 1926, the Tolkien family moved from Leeds to Oxford. And that was when they moved into the house at 22 Northmoor Road. Now, this is the house that they would live in for 4 years, and Christopher once recalled his father used to stand with his back to the fire in the study and tell stories to his children in that house. One of those stories may have been The Hobbit, although we don't know for sure, because John Ratliff has dated the composition of The Hobbit to actually after they moved over the fence to 20 Northmoor Road.
That's right. Well, and we've got one more for you, speaking of The Hobbit. In This Week in 1937, Tolkien was engaged in correspondence with Allen and Unwin about the upcoming publication of The Hobbit. Now, Christina Scull and Wayne Hammond's chronology, the new 3-volume set of which is phenomenal, I must say, tells us that Tolkien sent his publishers a proof of the publicity paragraph he had written about The Hobbit on this very day, January 7th. Meanwhile, the Allen and Unwin production department had written back to him on this day about some of his illustrations. The publishers think that his line drawings for The Hobbit are admirable and are having reproduction blocks made. Mirkwood, shaded with ink wash, quote, will present a little difficulty in reproduction unless it were to be printed separately on glossy paper, which we think would be disturbing.
I have to wonder, do they mean disturbing to the readers or disturbing to the Allen and Unwin accounting department?
Yeah, disturbingly expensive, I'd wager.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
You know, I'd also like to point out that illustration that he did for Mirkwood was actually a redrawn version of the painting of Tar Nifuin that he did in 1928 that we talked about all the way back in episode 41.
That's right, it is. Yeah. And we actually have
with the little Fëanorian lamp.
That's right. We have a picture of that up in our show notes for episode 41. So go check that out if you're not sure which one we're talking about. And he ended up retitling that painting one more time, didn't he?
That's right.
In 1973. Wow, this would have been really late.
Yeah.
For the 1974 J.R.R. Tolkien calendar, he called it Fangorn Forest.
Repurposed everything.
He repurposed it to stand in for Fangorn.
Very cool. Well, that's another story. But for now, let's get on with the discussion.
Let's do that.
So, you know, when we last left Bilbo, he had just left his brass buttons behind and had escaped the goblins, but he really had nothing else. He didn't know where his friends were. He'd lost his stuff, his food, his pony, everything. And interestingly, the first thing he noticed is that when the sun begins to sink, it's sinking behind the mountains, and he realizes that he's on the other side. So I'll read a couple paragraphs here real quickly, and we'll dive right into the chapter. "Good heavens," he exclaimed. "I seem to have got right to the other side of the Misty Mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where and where can Gandalf and the Dwarves have got to? I only hope to goodness they're not still back there in the power of the goblins." He still wandered on, out of the little high valley, over its edge and down the slopes beyond. But all the while, a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought not, now he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it when he heard voices.
I love that bit at the end.
And very miserable he felt
he
about it.
realizes it's
Absolutely.
his duty, but he's miserable about it. You know, it's a very Bagginsy took moment.
It is. It really
you know,
is. That's the
sense
Baggins
of-
took argument right there.
Sense of duty and propriety that, that wants to make him do the right
Do
thing.
the right
but he's
thing.
like, man, I really wish I didn't have to do that.
And the thought, even while it's growing, is described as a very uncomfortable thought.
Yeah. Uncomfortable.
More of
There's
that
one of our
comfort
favorite
moment.
words again.
That's absolutely right. I have to say, though, how different is this from the Bilbo of Chapter 1? You know, when he's like, struck by lightning, and he's
Yeah.
shaking like a jelly on the floor. And here he is, not happy about it, mind you, but willing to turn around, and who would be, willing to turn around and go rescue his friends.
Yeah.
Who aren't really his friends. They're just the rest of his company who don't really
That's
seem
true.
to care about him very much yet.
That's true. We call him his friends, and they're called his friends in the text, but he really is not
They aren't
all
really.
that friendly with most of them.
No.
Yeah.
Or
Or they're not all that friendly with him.
Yeah,
more
maybe
accurately.
Balin, maybe a couple others, but
Yeah.
I mean, he's willing to do this. I cannot even envision the Bilbo Baggins of Chapter 1 being willing to do that.
Yeah.
Ring of invisibility or not.
I wonder if it's the fact that he's on the other side of the mountains.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe there's a sense of actual transformation there, you know?
Yeah.
On the other side of the mountains, he was old Bilbo. Now he's crossed the mountains and he's new Bilbo. So maybe there's a, you know,
Right,
there's a-
after he
there's a-
pops the
there's a-
buttons off, right?
Yeah,
He's
there's a threshold.
broken the
there.
Baggins.
Yeah, broke the Baggins. There you go.
Yeah, like we talked about last
there's
episode, yeah.
Yeah. There's a threshold there that's been crossed. But but I also wonder if maybe there's a little element of practicality to it too.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. He's
he's
by
on the other-
himself.
yeah, he's by himself. He's on the other side of the mountains. I mean,
He can't get back
how is he
home.
going to get back? Yeah.
Oh, my. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you know, the decision, it says that he made up his mind that it was his duty. But you're right. There's a very practical sense here that, well, I mean, really, I suppose I'm better off going and looking for them. And even if I get killed, what am I going to do out here? I'm going to die of starvation, and I'm not going to go anywhere. I don't know where to go. I'm totally lost. I have no pony. I have no food.
Right.
I can't even get my vest to close or my waistcoat to close.
My poor ripped waistcoat is just like hanging open now. Yeah. I mean, and I don't think any of that diminishes the fact that, you know, he does want to do the right thing anyway.
That's right. Certainly the narrator makes that clear, right? This is
But yeah.
his duty. Yeah.
But your observation of, you know, how different he is from the Bilbo of Chapter 1, I think is really key. He's changed so much, and
very radically at this point.
and
I mean,
you know, it could be the mountains, it could be the ring, it's all of it, I think. You know,
it's a
just-
combination of all of those
yeah.
things.
Yeah. Speaking of the ring,
Yeah.
he's still got it on, doesn't he?
Yes, at this point he is still wearing his ring, and you know, he hears the voices and he starts taking a look. So what happens?
All right. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels, and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on with their journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend," said the wizard, "and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost him." The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with more sense. "He's been more trouble than you so far," said one. "If we've got to go back now into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then drat him, I say."
Drat him.
Drat him, I say. Gandalf answered angrily, "I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me to look for him, or I go and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can yourselves. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all is over."
I'm still stuck on drat him.
Drat him, I say.
Oh my goodness. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Gandalf's responsibility for him. I love that. I wish to goodness you'd not lost him.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. You know, it's a good old Gandalf moment, you know.
It is.
He feels responsible. He
He's my friend and not a bad little chap.
I mean, he doesn't feel completely responsible. He says you lost him.
You're right.
There is a bit of finger pointing going on here with
there most certainly is.
You lost him, and then the dwarves. I think we think
the
it's
argument
Dory,
that he gets in with Dory is like,
saying, he couldn't stick to his friends.
Yeah, Dory couldn't help us. You would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
And he makes a point. I mean, it's a pretty valid point. I think Gandalf might be having slightly unrealistic expectations of Dory.
True.
Oh, goodness. But
the bickering just keeps going on. I mean,
it does.
I know we're not going to read all of it, but
no.
You would have Dory just kind of starting to point the finger at everybody. You would have dropped him, and you nearly chopped my head off with Glomdring, and Thorin was stabbing all over.
Holes in me, and
yeah.
And you never get to the dwarves recognizing that it's their duty to go back and get him. Like Bilbo realizes it's his duty and he's going to do it. Here we get Gandalf telling them, look, we should do this. We should go back and look for him. And they haven't said yes or no yet. They're upset about it. They don't necessarily want to. They haven't said we're not going to, but they haven't said they will. I think eventually they'd have to, because Gandalf's threat there is pretty serious. Either you help me to look for him, or I go and look for him by myself and leave you to yourselves.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big threat. But
that's a good point, though. I mean, Gandalf is kind of being the conscience of the party here.
Mm-hmm.
He wants them to to do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
And they don't want to. And he really has to. He does have to threaten them pretty severely.
Well, and he tries to bring in some of their self-interest too, right? I mean, he says, if we can find him, you will thank me before all is over, because he knows that Bilbo has a role to play in this.
Right.
A really indispensable role, as we'll find out. But
but they can't see that yet. They can't see how he could possibly be of any use, because they still know the Baggins from the other side of the mountains.
That's right, though that will change shortly.
Yes, it will. Before you get to your next passage that you're going to read, I just want to point out one of my favorite words is back. Confusticate.
Confusticate, you're right.
We're here without the Baggler. Confusticate him. In fact, I think I probably ought to do a philology fair segment on that word, maybe
on confusticate,
maybe in our next episode.
That's awesome. That really is. Well, thank you for pointing that out, because you're right. I didn't include that in either of our passages to be read as we try to get through a chapter without reading the whole thing.
Such a burden that to have to skip, to have to leave perfectly good prose on the table.
Wouldn't it be nice to read the entirety?
But we have to.
We do. It's called the law. We want to respect intellectual property rights, and we're not making an audio book, folks. We're making a podcast. So, fair use and all that. We do use small portions and then discuss them. That's what makes it. That's what makes it fair use, called transformative use. All right.
Today's PSA brought to you by Alan Sisto of the Prancing Pony Podcast.
That was a public service announcement on copyright and fair use. So, next up, let's see. So, Bilbo, I don't know. He jumps out a little earlier than I would, frankly. I would have waited to find out what their decision was.
I think I would have
too. Like, well, you won't have to go and find me because here I am. Or, you were going to let me rot? Thanks a lot, you jerks. I mean, I want to know what they were going to do.
Clearly the bigger man than both of us.
Very much so. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he may be smaller in stature, but he's a bigger man.
He's bigger in heart.
Yes, he is. So, needless to say, he startles them quite seriously, especially Balin, who was the lookout man.
I would just add. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize at all.
The last episode, which folks may not remember because it's been a few weeks since it released, but the last episode we talked about how quickly he starts learning how to use the ring. So very quickly he starts using invisibility to his advantage, and we see a continuation of that here.
You're right. We do.
Yeah, we talked about how he's using the ring. He's using his invisibility to observe, gather information.
Yeah,
and you're right. I would totally have waited longer to get more information on what's going on.
And I might have done the reveal a little differently. Like I might have taken it off while I was behind a tree and then popped out from behind the tree. But look at the text here. He steps down into the middle of them and slips off the ring.
Yeah.
Wow. How did that happen? Where did you come from?
It's like the same thing he does at his birthday party at the beginning of Fellowship. He just disappears right in front of everybody. He's really He likes the drama.
He does like the drama a little bit, doesn't he? Oh, goodness. That's a very good point. I hadn't even thought about that. Loves to be the little bit of the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead and read my...
Make them talk. Make people talk.
That's right. That's right. For 99 days, was it? Or a year and... I can't remember.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember exactly.
All they talked about for a year and a day. That's what it was.
Something like that.
It was. But so I'm going to go ahead and take a next section here, and we'll talk about exactly what influence or impact the ring has on his connection with the dwarves. It is a fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatever about the ring. And when they asked him how he did it, he said, "Oh, just crept along, very carefully and quietly." I'm sorry, just so nonchalant.
I know. It's like as anticlimactic as like the first edition text where, you could just see him telling the dwarves like, "Oh yeah, I met this guy named Gollum and he basically just showed me the way out and I said goodbye and then I found you guys."
Exactly.
Like nothing happened, nothing to see.
Nothing at all, just move along. So Balin responds, "Well, it is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted, and I take off my hood to you," which he did. "Balin at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they had lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about the finding of the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition, and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. Yeah, so we get his, what did we call it a couple episodes back? A departure from truth?
His departure from truth, yeah. It's not a lie.
No, just a departure from truth.
Yeah.
This lie of omission, this decision to not say anything about the ring.
And that actually is in the first edition, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the same. That's not something that was changed as the ring became more evil.
the only thing that changed was how he obtained the ring. Well, not even that. He found it, but the difference was that was the escape, Gollum showing him the way out.
Yeah.
But how he found the ring, how he kept the ring, the role the ring played in the riddle game, all of that was the same in the first edition. But you know what? He loves the praise. You look back there, Bilbo is so pleased with their praise. I can't blame him. They've been riding him and giving him grief for this whole trip. Some of it deserved, some of it not. And who can blame him for wanting to be respected?
Yeah.
We talked about how that he didn't have any respect from them, and he lost the respect of the fellow hobbits because he was no longer because he was going on an adventure.
He was kind of in this limbo with he kind of had no. He wasn't really respected by anybody at this point.
No respect. No respect at all.
Oh man. Oh. Wow. Dangerfield.
Pulling out the old Rodney Dangerfield.
Crazy.
Terribly, by the way. I can't do it.
I recognize. Well, it's a pretty.
It's delivery.
It's a pretty well-known catchphrase. So I guess that's why. Yeah. But no, I think it's interesting that that you're right. Now this is his first step towards acceptance by the dwarves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Their opinion of him went up a great deal. His reputation went. That's what it was.
Yes,
went up a great deal. And notice right after we get that statement about his reputation, we get this. I think this is the second time this phrase has been used: a first-class burglar. We talked about this with the troll incident a few chapters ago.
The troll
if he had been a really
troll incident,
right? If he had been a really first-class and legendary burglar, here's all the things he would have done.
Yeah, he would have.
But he couldn't do any of those. All he did was pick the troll's pocket poorly. But now. If they had any doubts that he was a first-class burglar, those doubts are gone now.
Doubts are gone. They believe him now.
He's up there. They believe he is a first-class burglar, and that's a big deal.
That's huge. And I love this little reset.
Of course, it helps that he didn't tell him about the invisibility ring.
Yeah.
They think it was all on his own stealth,
Yeah, exactly. They think he's a real superhero. He's more like Batman. He just has gadgets.
Right. That's true.
I love the reset, though, with Balin. where he does, we go back almost to the very beginning. And in fact, let me go back. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up. But when Balin shows up, that's the one where he's so. I think that's when he's so lost that he doesn't even know how to respond. He responds okay to Dwalin, right? I mean, Dwalin at your service, Bilbo Baggins at yours. I'm just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me. When Balin comes in, Balin says, Balin at your service. He's surprised. Okay, and he's surprised, and all he says is thank you. And it was not the correct thing to say, but they've begun to arrive and flustered it badly. And so here he gets this second chance to kind of have this greeting. And Balin's like, I take off my hood, Balin at your service, and he gets the response right this time.
That's a really good catch. I mean, that's like, it's like a second chance to make a first impression.
Exactly. Yeah. And he really has. Balin's very, very impressed with him. And, Balin's always a guy we felt has been sort of maybe on his side a little bit.
He's been a bit sympathetic, yeah.
Yeah. He's not the one who called him a grocer.
Right.
Or that, doesn't belong. But yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah,
I really, I love that little section. There's so much there.
Yeah, it is. There is.
He tells more. He tells them all about the riddle and how, he couldn't guess what he had in his pocket. Now, it's funny because the dwarves don't go, well, what did you have in your pocket?
Good point.
Because I would have asked.
Yeah.
But he gets out, and then so he finally tells them, all right, and here I am. So what happens after that? We get a little suspicion, don't we?
Yeah, we do. The dwarves looked at him with quite a new respect when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through, as if it was not very difficult or very alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins is more about him than you guess." He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed at the part of his tale that he had left out.
Is it really that Gandalf had guessed it, or is it Bilbo's just having an attack of his conscience?
A little guilty conscience?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We have little kids, so we know when they're fibbing.
Oh, yeah.
Even if they think they're getting away with it.
Yeah. But he gives Bilbo this look. He knows. He knows.
What's up? Because you did not have this ability before.
Yeah.
You're quiet, but you're not that quiet.
Right.
Yeah. I love that story about, I dodged him. And that's pretty straightforward from first edition as well, right? I mean, he doesn't, that story's not radically different. I mean, there are a few different words and phrases, but it's the same concept.
It wasn't all that different, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he just talks about dodging the goblins as if it was not a big deal, which it isn't if you're invisible.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting that that now this is the first time that Gandalf is talking about Bilbo having more about him. As in now he's now starting to live up to this potential. We talked at the beginning about how Gandalf. One of the things that was a bit different from the movie, not to keep harping on that, but one of the things that was different at the unexpected party was, Gandalf says, if I say he's a burglar he is or will be when the time comes.
Yeah.
And Gandalf was sort of acknowledging, look, he's not that now, I get it, but he will be. And now this seems to be the first time that he really is becoming what Gandalf, he's becoming what Gandalf promised.
Yeah. Yeah, you have. I mean, even recently, just before he showed up, Gandalf's still talking about him in the concept of potential. He says, if we can only find him again, you will thank me before all is over.
That's true.
You will thank me right now.
That's true, yeah.
And yet here he's saying he has more about him than you guess. This is, he's done something. What did I tell you?
Yeah.
And that's awesome. He's proved Gandalf right to the dwarves.
He's starting to really be valuable to this party, and before long, he's basically going to be leading it.
Pretty much, yeah. We'll be seeing some of that later. So wisely, before the dwarves have a chance to say, "So, what was it you did have in your pocket?" By the way, why couldn't he answer that question? Bilbo has questions of his own, and unlike Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf here does seem willing to answer questions pretty easily.
Oh yeah.
So I'm going to read a few paragraphs here. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once, so now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of evil goblins in that part of the mountains, but their main gate used to come out on a different pass, one more easy to travel by, so that they often caught people benighted near their gates. Evidently, people had given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken, quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up to now.
"I must see if I can't find a more or less decent giant to block it up again," said Gandalf, "or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all."
As soon as Gandalf had heard Bilbo's yell, he realized what had happened. In the flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him, he had nipped inside the crack just as it snapped to. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat down and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows.
"A very ticklish business it was," he said. "Touch and go."
But of course, Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at Old Took's Midsummer Eve parties, as you remember. So, love that. There's a lot of little things to explore here, isn't there?
Surprisingly, yeah.
I think we start obviously with what we noticed before in the beginning of the last chapter. Actually, I think it was more in Overhill and Underhill that we noticed that Gandalf knew the paths to take. You know, he knew, he and Elrond had studied.
He knew that there were goblins there. Yeah,
exactly.
But he just thought that the gate was in a different place.
Right. Let's take the pass that doesn't have the Goblin Gate in it. Probably a good idea. But this one, obviously, the goblins didn't get the memo.
Yeah. Well, and it says, people must have stopped going that way, so the goblins moved it so that they could capture people again.
My trap no longer works. There's not enough bait here, apparently.
Yeah. The prey has gotten wise, so let's move the trap. It's a really neat little bit of history.
Yeah, it is. You're right, because imagine the amount of work that had to go into that for the goblins.
Yeah.
But they did it. And it's also a reminder that there are giants. And that some of them, or at least one of them, can be more or less decent.
More or less decent, yeah. We talked about a little bit of this, episode 58 is when we talked about giants last.
Right, the storm, the thunder
the stone
battle.
Giants, yeah. And all the different things that those might be. But one thing we know they are is they are.
They are. They are real. They're not imaginary. They're not, and that some of them might be decent. I think we talked about, the tie-in with Treebeard, and that at one point he was a giant, and that Tolkien kind of branched them off when he decided they were going to be good.
Right.
The Ents, that is.
Yep.
Because of we go back even linguistically, right?
Right. The word Ent actually was an Old English word meaning giant. Yeah.
Yeah, the work of giants. Good stuff.
That was a fun discussion. Yeah.
Wasn't it?
A lot of
good
good stuff
that.
on that.
There's some really cool speculation there, too.
Yep.
And then we get some more about the nature of Gandalf's magic. I love this. We actually get to see him working up this magic. And we kind of get a feel for what are his strengths. And we know it's fire and lights.
Fire and lights. And that should make sense, shouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Knowing what we know about, the ring that he has, being the ring of fire. It's an interesting little hint. In fact, I didn't check the first edition to see if
has the big old ring of fire.
Every single time Narya comes up, we're going to drop some Johnny Cash into the podcast.
Fire.
I didn't check the first edition to see if this was in it.
I didn't either on this one. I think I kind of, once I got past the ring and the lies about it, I was like, I think it's the same from here on out.
Yeah.
I think it's the same. I'll have to look at it again. It's worth, if there is a difference, we'll discuss it in the postscript.
Yeah. I'll have to check that.
I don't think it is different.
I don't think it is either, because I think I would have picked up on that when I was reading.
Yeah. But I love this. He knows about the back door. He knows about the, he knows fire and lights. And that's, of course, the magic that he uses. I mean, even when Gandalf hears Bilbo's yell, that flash, it's a
That's right, yeah.
A fiery light that killed the goblins.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
That's the thing about this book is, I didn't think, at least, when we were starting to wrap up the Silmarillion and thinking, okay, we're going to head into the Hobbit. My thought was, well, we'll do that in about 10 weeks.
We kind of thought there wouldn't be really that much to discuss.
Because the Silmarillion was so dense and so thick and so heavy and so rich. I thought, well, how are we going to find that much information in the Hobbit? And wow, it's still there.
What's cool about it is that
style.
it is, and what's cool about it is that some of it is accidental, so we can just marvel at the the brilliance of either Tolkien's accidental connections or some of these deliberate retcons that he put in there.
Yeah.
And some of it is just fun to speculate on. I kind of feel like we're speculating a lot more with these Hobbit episodes than
I think we get to. You're right.
Silmarillion.
Well, it's not written like a history. You know,
that's true.
And that's the thing with the Silmarillion is it's written in such a way that you really
information's
feel like
there.
you can't go outside of what's there.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, you've got a reading after Gandalf continues to talk about what happened, and they get to the point where they killed the great goblin.
They're kind of celebrating, the fact that they're...
Yeah, woohoo, we won!
Yeah, we're doing so great. So that's where I'll pick up. But the wizard called them to their senses. "We must be getting on at once, now we are a little rested," he said. "They will be out after us in hundreds when night comes on, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon, if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by." "Oh, yes," he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. "You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today's Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles and come right down through the heart of the mountains, and are now on the other side, quite a shortcut. But we are not at the point to which our paths would have brought us. We are too far to the north, and we have some awkward country ahead, and we are still pretty high up. Let's get on."
Indeed. It kind of makes me think a little bit of the scene in The Fellowship of the Ring when Aragorn has to stir the party to move after Gandalf's fall into Moria.
That's a good catch.
Because he's like, we got to go. The orcs are going to be out in big numbers. They're going to be able to follow us. We've got to get moving. We can't hang.
In a very similar situation too. They've just escaped. They've just suffered a really horrible defeat as opposed to a victory.
That's the thing. The difference is the victory versus defeat. But yeah,
right. But they've just crossed the mountains. They've just escaped the darkness of the mountains, and you get this kind of sense of here. It's a sense of relief.
Yes.
But yeah, he reminds them. Look, we've got a quest here.
Yeah. We still have plenty to do here, and this is not a safe place to just sit and hang out. I also love the recognition of the time that's passed. I mean, we're talking 2.5, 3 days that passed while they were in the mountains. That's an incredibly long period of time to go without food, as poor Bilbo would point out.
Poor Bilbo, I know it. And that's, amazing that he has, again, this is another sign of the change in Bilbo.
Yeah.
Is that, he's depressed about the fact that he hasn't had a meal.
Yeah.
But he's survived this long, and you can't really imagine him surviving before that.
I don't know that I could. Seriously, not have a meal since the night before last?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a long time.
I imagine
to go
spending
without
time
food.
with Gollum would probably quell your appetite.
Probably. I certainly wouldn't feel like any seafood, that's for sure.
No, not at all.
I've smelled enough fish for a lifetime.
Yeah. One more cool thing here is the moon. We talked about this again in the last episode. We saw that goblins don't like the sun.
Yeah.
We see here that, the effect the sun has on them, the moon does not have. They don't mind the moon much.
Yeah, so maybe they don't like it as much as they would prefer a new moon.
Sure.
But it doesn't bother them. It doesn't turn their legs to jelly and,
Right. Right, exactly. You make them giddy.
Makes their heads giddy. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's just an interesting point.
That's a very good point.
If we go back to the Silmarillion chapter where we saw the sun and moon, they're both these these holy lights, these sacred objects that the Valar have created, but
guided by powerful Maiar.
Yeah. But we saw that about the eyes of Arion, the sun, or just Morgoth could never stand those, and
no,
Tilion, the Maya that drives the moon, just doesn't have that effect.
Not as much power. Yeah. My goodness. And, of course, they're way too far to the north, so they've got to figure out how to get where they're going. Everyone's hungry.
Yeah.
Goodness. They're going to have to find something to eat because that's a very, very long time to go without food. But, of course, they don't have a choice. They're, like Gandalf points out, well, you can always go back to the goblins and say, excuse me, can we have our ponies back?
Right.
See what they say. Well, okay.
We left some rations. Can we have those back, please?
You're not going to like those. It's not goblin food.
Right.
So
what's cool about this is actually Bilbo does manage to find a little something to eat.
He does.
Nothing very good, but a little bit of sorrel,
Sorrel.
which I had to look up. It's kind of a sour, acidic tasting leafy green.
okay.
And some wild strawberries.
In other words, it's something they probably put in overpriced salads these days.
Probably, yeah.
And talk about how organic it is and how healthy it is.
And this would be organic, of course.
Of course it would. This is all organic.
Oh, yeah. Still
well, I'm going to go
capitalism.
ahead and read that passage, actually. So this is a rarity. I'm getting to read a passage that has absolutely no dialogue. It's all landscape description,
All right.
but it's really, really cool stuff. Well, and, events, but not, there's nobody talking here.
Right.
As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat. But the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path. And he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found on its bank, but it was not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage and the marjoram, and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down and started other pieces below them slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with a dust and a noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below them seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together in a fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines that here stood right up the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forest to the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little Hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter from the onslaught of the rocks. Soon the danger was over, the slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below. What a crazy little adventure.
That's an exciting scene.
It is. That would be cinematically fascinating, and I don't know why Jackson didn't include that.
That's true. Yeah.
Really,
I wonder.
We're being honest here.
Yeah, I know. That would have been a perfect.
They could have had massive, 6 foot tall. Could have been like the slide of skulls in the Army of the Dead scene.
Yeah. I know.
But it reminded me of the beginning of
that,
chapter. Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
You're about to say what I was about to say.
Yeah, chapter 4.
The note that
right?
Anderson made about chapter 4. Yeah.
Overhill and underhill. I'm looking at it here that boulders came galloping down the mountainsides, let loose by the midday sun. They passed among them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. So I think that journey in Switzerland really had more of an impact on Tolkien.
It really had an effect on him, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it really did.
Yeah.
He's just, creating that moment again here in the story with the landscape, with the landslide. Powerful image.
Yeah, it really is. And this whole section that you just read is full of just powerful imagery. Even before that, there's the stuff about the thyme and the sage and the marjoram.
Yeah.
He doesn't describe the smell, but I know those smells well.
Yeah, you really do.
You really are just there. Mm-hmm. You can just smell the herbs. There's so much. We've talked before about how vivid Tolkien can paint these landscapes with words, and he really does that here.
Absolutely. And I love this, the way the landslide grows from rubbish and small pebbles to the larger bits of split stone and then lumps of rock and then the entire slope. Yeah.
It's been a long time since we've had a Babylon 5 reference. I'm just thinking of Kosh with the
yes.
The avalanche has started. It is too late for the pebbles to vote.
Man, I love that show.
That's great.
That's a perfect quote for this episode, by the way. It really is.
But you really get that sense of it. Just like you said, it starts slowly, gradually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And but pebbles can't vote. It's already happening.
That is correct. Well,
I wish I could do that sound effect thing that happened when
I
Kosh
know.
talks. There's that sound effect underneath. That's
that's not something we can just do with our voices. I'd have to find a way to do that in post.
yeah.
I'm not going to.
That's all right.
I don't think I'm going to bother.
It's too much work.
That is a
Kosh.
cool
We need a
effect.
Kosh filter, a
Kosh
Vorlon filter. Yep.
So the landslide ends. Nobody's really happy about this. They're rubbing their bruised legs.
Oh, yeah.
you know. And Bilbo doesn't even want to go any further. It's so dark.
Yeah,
he can't
Gandalf
get
seems kind of
anywhere.
happy about it. He's like, well, that's got us on a bit.
Yes. Well, that
really
was
looking for the silver lining.
It was
and
kind of
just-
like catching the express train right there.
yeah.
And I love that Bilbo doesn't want to go any further. I love this phrase. It was so dark that he could only just see Thorin's beard whacking beside him, and so quiet that he could hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. All I can hear is the line that was not in the book, but that they gave to Haldir in the films.
The dwarf breathes so loud. We could have shot him in the dark.
Yeah, I mean, that's right from this. But
Yeah.
anyway, so we've got a passage for you to read. Now that we get kind of the reference to the title of the chapter in this passage, don't we?
All right. Yeah. Oh, this is a fun one.
It is.
After what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden, they heard a howl away downhill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another away to the right and a good deal nearer to them, then by another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins's hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had had it described to him often enough in tales. One of his elder cousins, on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see you to catch you. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves," he said. And it became a proverb, though we now say out of the frying pan into the fire in the same sort of uncomfortable situations.
I love that. It's
That's
like
so
the
great.
invention of the game of golf. It's this.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, you know all about this. Mm-hmm. So
In
cool.
fact, I'm after reading that again now, I think I need to start working that into my everyday speech. Instead of out of
escaping
the frying
goblins
pan
to be
into
caught
the-
by wolves.
Yeah, that's just escaping goblins to be caught by wolves. Because I don't get enough funny looks.
I was gonna say because you really want people to look at you like,
Yeah.
What?
What?
Somebody call security, please.
What are you talking? What are you talking about?
Oh my goodness.
Please go away.
I love this that even though they're in this clearing, that there's something about it that strikes them as
It just
not a nice
feels bad.
place.
Yeah, it just feels wrong.
Yeah, like a tangible evil presence. The wolves. Oh man!
And then what's
the
great about that
wolves.
is that it's still, there's nothing wrong to see. And then, of course, the first sense
is a
that
hear.
alerts them to the danger is
Yeah.
hearing. Yeah, the howl.
Yeah, it's not sight that's the. There may be nothing wrong to see, but you're about to hear some very wrong things.
Yeah.
Interesting, of course, that Bilbo knew that noise. He, even though he'd never heard it, he'd had it described to him enough to know what it was.
And this
That
thing
must
this thing that he just heard about in stories is now real.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of things that's happening on this journey.
Yeah, that is true. That must have put a real chill in his blood, though, to hear it.
Oh, it had to,
Oh
yeah.
my goodness.
Well, this phrase, it was too much for Bilbo. I think that's
Yeah.
a phrase we see earlier on, isn't it?
Yeah, too much for Bilbo. I think that was
hearing
in the first
things like
chapter, too.
hearing things like you may not come back alive. That was too much
Yeah,
for Bilbo. I
that
think he
was.
says.
Absolutely, or something along those lines.
Yeah. So for just a moment, he's just that little hobbit, back in his hobbit hole.
Agreed. Now we're going to get into a big sidebar here in a little bit, but on the wolves, the edge of
yeah.
the wild,
Yeah.
against
The
the evil
wargs.
packs. But I don't think we don't get the warg phrase yet, do we? That's
No, we
in
don't.
the next read.
Yeah, that'll
Okay.
be in the next bit.
So we'll touch on that. But for now, I wanted to touch on that amazing phrase, "escaping goblins to be caught by wolves."
Yeah.
I stole this. I said, I'm going to find out. I'm going to do a little word nerdery of my own here, inspired by my brilliant co-host to research the history of this phrase. Now, I think part of it just comes from I love researching phrases, and, how something came to be a phrase that we use. And you were really more into the etymology
I like words.
of
I like the changes in words. Yeah, sure.
So this made sense. Well,
that's cool.
The Oxford Dictionary of English Proverbs, which was put together, the second edition of which was put together in 1948, and that's where I got this information, provides examples that go back as far as the early 16th century. There's one from 1532 by Thomas More that has the out of the frying pan into the fire. There wasn't a single phrase about escaping goblins to be caught by wolves. I just want to be real clear. Okay. there's none of those, unfortunately.
Gotcha. No reference to that.
None. But the out of the frying pan into the fire went all the way back to 1532 in English. In Italian, there was an Italian collection of fables written in the 1490s, and this is so cool. There is a fable in which it describes live fish being cooked in a pan, and one of the fish basically saying, we've got to jump out, let's save our lives, and they fall in the burning coals, and all the fish curse the fact that they followed this guy's bad advice.
Huh. Okay.
So, literally, from out of the frying pan into the fire was this fable in the 1490s. Now,
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so it goes back a ways. Now, the same concept, this idea of going from a bad situation to worse, goes back even further. The Greek anthology, which dates pretty much right around the end of BCE and CE, so the Common Era, like we're talking almost 2,000 years ago. There's a tale of a rabbit running from a dog that jumps into the sea only to be eaten by a sea dog, and the sea dog is a dogfish shark, is what experts would believe. That's what sea dog references. But the idea is that this rabbit's running from a dog, jumps to the ocean, and chomp, gets eaten by a dog.
Oh, that's
a dogfish
great.
Shark. So, somehow that doesn't quite have the same ring. Escaping the dog,
escaping from a dog
dogfish
to
shark.
be eaten by a sea dog.
Yeah, that just doesn't quite ring as nicely as out of the frying pan into the fire.
No.
But
or escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, for that matter.
I love that, though.
Yeah.
I'll let you say it, though. You tell me how that works out. Okay? I don't...
I'll do
I
that.
already get enough strange looks.
I'll try that. Yeah, I'll try that,
You know what you should do? You should get your wife to video you saying that to somebody and just seeing how they react. We could man on the street reactions.
to me just walking. Boy, that's escaping
around.
goblins to be caught by wolves. Who are you?
And we could do
Please.
a real quick montage of all the weird expressions on people's faces that happen.
Man, don't give my wife any ideas. She'll do it too.
You're right, actually. I better not. You don't have time for that. I'm sorry. No.
But I like that. I'm glad you looked into that, because that's a. I don't think about origins of phrases as much. You're right.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you picked up on that one.
Yeah, no, how could I not?
It's a great little philology joke. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Farmer Giles of Ham.
Yes. All the inside philology
little
gags.
dictionary jokes in that book. There's the whole joke about the blunderbuss and the Worming Hall and things like that, like all these place names.
Yep. Oh, all the place
great.
names. You're right.
And Farmer Giles and the Hobbit have a lot in common too, with the dragon and everything. But
that is true.
That's great. That's a cool one.
Good old Chrysalax.
Yes.
Okay, so we're not going to read the description of the dwarves climbing up into the trees, but they do get into some trees.
Come on.
Okay.
I can't read about the larch.
At least read about the larch. Go ahead, just read that
Number
one.
one. And now, number one, the larch. The larch. And now, number three, the larch. Sorry, I just had to. I cannot read about a larch without thinking of
about
that
Monty
which is one of my
Python skit.
favorite Monty Python Flying Circus sketches of all time.
That is comedy gold right there.
How to recognize different types of trees from quite a long way away.
We should, if we can find that, we should post a link to that in our show notes. That would be.
You know what? I will do that.
sharing.
I will make a note to see if we can find that. I think
That
most
is
of the
good stuff.
I think most of the Monty Python stuff is available.
Yeah.
I think it's actually available legally on YouTube.
Yeah,
I think Monty
yeah.
Python's got it up there.
So they're all in different trees, and it is funny that actually that you've got a larch, a pine, and a fir. Now, I don't know forestry. I'm not a tree guy. I mean, I love trees, but I don't know them. So I don't know if it's particularly unusual to have 3 different, very, very different types of trees around a single clearing. So maybe one of our forestry experts amongst our many thousands of listeners could tell us whether that's particularly unusual. So,
That would be very good to know. Yeah.
yeah. It just
I mean,
does seem a
I
little
picked up
odd.
on the fact that I know just enough to know that they're all conifers, and that's about
yeah.
it. But that was pretty much the limit of my arboreal knowledge.
Arboreal. Ooh, very well done, sir.
Oh, thank you.
So
I almost said dendrological, but then I wasn't sure if that was the correct form of that, and I've just embarrassed myself if it's not.
well, then you've gone ahead and done that anyway. So we're not going to read this line either, but, well, okay, I will. Bilbo could not get into any tree and was scuttling about from trunk to trunk like a rabbit that has lost its hole and has a dog after it. Now, I love that, first of all, because that also references the rabbit running from a dog that we just talked about in the Greek anthology, which Tolkien had to be aware of.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
Okay, I mean, the original source for the idea of
Yeah,
escaping
yeah,
goblins
good catch.
by wolves. But also because it references something that we see several times, and that is these really odd rabbit moments. I have to tell you, I'd always kind of blown those things off because, of course, Tolkien, and I think you'll point this out later, Tolkien has always said that there's no connection.
Yeah, hobbits are not
rabbits.
They're not rabbits.
And Anderson even acknowledges that, but there's this great quote that I'm going to read here, and I'll just leave it stand as is because he does a great job of compiling all the moments. Tolkien usually refuted any association between his invented word hobbit and rabbit, but internal evidence suggests otherwise. One of the trolls calls Bilbo a nasty little rabbit. Here he is likened to a rabbit that has lost its hole and has a dog after it. In the eagle's Eyrie, he worries about being torn up for supper like a rabbit. One of the eagles says to him, "You need not be frightened like a rabbit, even if you look rather like one." And then Beorn chides him, "Little bunny is getting nice and fat." And Thorin, in his fury, shakes poor Bilbo like a rabbit.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so
I know.
actually, there.
There's a
So
ton
no
of
wonder
them.
some people kind of jump to that conclusion. I think we
Yeah.
talked about that before, certainly in one of our postscripts about the fact that that a lot
It's
of people sort
not,
of jump
but
to the
no
conclusion.
wonder people think it is, right?
Yeah. Well, and I know you're right. I mean, Tolkien did say a lot to try and disprove this idea. I mean, I think Anderson goes on to quote how Tolkien even said it might have even come from Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt.
Right.
But certainly not rabbit, as some people think. I think that was Tolkien's quote. But then, Anderson points out that in drafting Appendix F of Lord of the Rings, Tolkien wrote of the word, he said, "I must admit that its faint suggestion of rabbit appealed to me. Not that hobbits at all resemble rabbits unless it be in burrowing." Now, this note was actually struck out of the draft, and it's published in History of Middle-earth in Volume 12, the Peoples of Middle-earth volume. But, yeah, definitely at some point that idea appealed to him. And again, not it's not the resemblance, but maybe just something of the character or,
or just even the
personality.
sound of the word.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, so often the sound of
And
of
the burrowing,
language.
the hole.
Yes. Holbitla, which is, of course, hole dweller. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Very cool.
So, very cool stuff. And I really wanted to make sure we got that in there because, it's just a fun discussion. I mean, it's, earlier he was the Burra Hobbit. Now he's a Hobber Rabbit.
Now he's a hobber rabbit.
Which I love. But good stuff.
And you know what else? I think it was last episode you talked about scuttling.
Yes.
And here he is
Here
scuttling
he is scuttling
again.
about from trunk to trunk. Yeah, you're right, because we had the
He scuttled
comparison.
and Gollum shambled, right?
Yes, I love the shambled because I always pictured shambling being something more like a zombie does, just kind of shambling.
I agree.
But there
Kind of an
he used-
aimless kind of walking.
Yeah. But certainly Gollum wasn't aimless at that point. But
No, that's very true.
so All right, so we get them up in the trees, including Bilbo, much to Dory's chagrin. And, Dory doing the right thing here, man. What a hero, right? He climbs out of the tree and lets Bilbo climb up on his back.
Yeah, that's true.
So we'll pick up there. And we'll read through the end of this. We're splitting this chapter in case that's not obvious.
Right. Yes.
I mean, let's just tell you that right now.
Yeah.
We're nearing the hour mark, and clearly we're not even halfway through.
We couldn't possibly give this chapter the full
prancing pony.
I'm gonna let you do it so that you can do the effect later on.
Oh, well, let's see if I can get it even now. The full prancing pony podcast treatment. And I know you got that.
I heard that one. Yeah, that was good
It's
stuff.
about what I send to the PC from. You know what? Actually, I just realized if you didn't hear it, then Zencaster didn't hear it because we're not recording like we used to. Thanks to our Patreon family, we're recording using a much more
sophisticated,
a much
piece of
better
technology.
system. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little tool called Zencaster that enables us to record our WAV files independently, and then it uploads them to Dropbox where I do all my magic in post. So stay tuned for that really
so
cool
good
series.
it even made my Gollum voice sound good.
Well, when I do it, I can.
It was that was all post. That was all effects.
Don't I wish? Yeah, I did a pitch shift, and I did some really cool, effects, and no. All right, so
you applied the addicted to a piece of gold filter, which is kind of a cool one.
Yeah,
not to mention the GPS, the Gollum GPS filter.
Oh
course.
Man, that was I
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that back again.
How funny that
We'll
was.
be here for another 20 minutes talking about that. I'm sorry. But,
oh man, that was good stuff. But so that we don't spend the next half hour just talking about Gollum GPS voices, I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after Dory gets Bilbo on his back. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself. Only just in time. A wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up and nearly got him. In a minute, there was a whole pack of them yelping all around the tree and leaping up at the trunk, with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named, cannot climb trees. For a time, they were safe. Luckily, it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for long at any time, but in the cold and the wind, with wolves all around below waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. I'm just going to, as an aside, I would imagine with the wolves all around below waiting for you, that pretty much trumps any weather condition. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I would think that makes
so.
it miserable.
Would,
even if it's a palm tree on Hawaii,
I probably wouldn't be worried about, sitting on a branch, how uncomfortable that is and how cold it is.
Or the fact that I might catch pneumonia, really.
Yeah.
Or,
it's pretty much the wolves all around.
Pretty much, yeah. Being dinner for a large dog-like crew.
Yeah. Even if you had one of those little cushions, that you bring to the stadium to sit on, it would not be comfortable.
Yeah, or a folding chair even. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even a hammock.
I don't know how you're getting a folding chair into a tree, though. I mean,
well,
certainly not into the Larch.
Well played. The Larch.
The Larch.
Oh, man. I'm going to have a really hard time reading the rest of this section. Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much.
I do what I can. Please.
You do.
Continue.
This glade in the ring of trees, the Larch, was evidently a meeting place of the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree in which Dory and Bilbo were, and then went snuffling about till they had smelt out every tree that had anyone in it. These they guarded too, while all the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seemed, went and sat in a great circle in the glade, and in the middle of the circle was a great gray wolf. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it. Bilbo did not, but it sounded terrible to him, and as if all their talk was about cruel and wicked things, as it was. Every now and then, all the wargs in the circle would answer their gray chief all together, and their dreadful clamor almost made the hobbit fall out of his pine tree. There you go. So Dory gets Bilbo into the tree, and I love it that he risks his life to do it. You know, I mean, he does the right thing. Go Dory.
Yeah. Interesting. You know, did we talk about this a moment ago? That Thorin actually tasked Dory with
no, we didn't talk about
time.
it. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I mean, yeah, you're seeing that the dwarves, Thorin and Dory certainly, and Balin, as you mentioned earlier, they're really starting to see Bilbo's value. You know, he's worth rescuing at this point.
He's worth at least 3 dwarves.
Yeah. You get 3 dwarves for 1 hobbit with an invisibility ring.
2 dwarves, a second-round draft choice, and cash consideration for 1 burglar hobbit.
Yeah, with an invisibility ring. You know?
Well, yeah, that's key. I mean, without the invisibility ring, it's going to have to be a 6th-round draft pick.
Right.
Anyway,
but yeah, we get that little bit. You know, Bilbo's really proven his value to the company, and so they're they're treating him as
as a member of the company,
as a member of the group.
Because they would do that for a dwarf.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. If one of the other dwarves couldn't get up, they would have done exactly that same thing.
Yeah.
We have a huge sidebar on the wargs and wolves thing, so we're going to hold off on that for a second to talk about some other bits from this. There was a note that I saw in Olson's book that I thought was worth mentioning. He made an observation that the wildness of the wargs makes them actually a little less evil than the goblins. That is, it's his position, and I think I agree with him, that they're not as capable of a pure evil as the advanced or civilized goblins. It's an interesting point that he makes. We'll see that more in next week's episode as we actually get to see the goblins' character here compared to the wargs. But it is interesting that they're wild animals first, and then they also have this evil nature.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, they're to a certain degree they're just being themselves. They're just being wild animals, as you say.
Yeah, I mean
they're not killing with forethought and malicious intent the way goblins are. They're just.
They are planning a raid, so I'm not sure
that's true.
That's true. But yeah,
but they're less evil. I guess that's the key.
You're right. Exactly. I mean, they can't. They're not even sure what to do with these dwarves. They're waiting for the goblins to come.
Yeah.
As we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there definitely is some intelligence there. We don't know. We don't know.
Oh, there definitely is. I mean, there's
how much
language.
Or what kind, but
the language
there's
alone is
exactly
evidence
the fact
of
that there's
intelligence.
language, the fact that they're camping out at the base of each tree.
Oh yeah.
So there's definitely more than just pure animal instinct.
Animal instinct.
But,
I don't think his point wasn't that it was the animal nature per se, as much as the wildness.
The
versus
wildness
the
as opposed to civilization.
Yeah. That something about the advanced nature of the goblins is actually what made them even more evil, and I can go with that. But
yeah,
I think. Really, unless there's more, I think it's time for us to jump into the kind of that breakdown of the wolves and wargs thing. Would you agree? Is there anything you want to mention before we tackle?
No,
that?
I think this is the time, and I think it'll be good to revisit this for folks who maybe haven't listened to our earlier Silmarillion episodes because
we discussed
first
this back
talked about
in episode 32.
32, with Beren and Luthien. And it's interesting that they came up in Beren and Luthien. They're coming up here. Before we start that sidebar, I guess I will say that Ratliff actually drew a connection there that I hadn't really thought about before. We talked before about the fact that at one time Tolkien thought that maybe Mirkwood might have been the same as Tower Nufuin from the Silmarillion.
Yes, that's true.
And thought that maybe this story might have happened much sooner after Beren and Luthien's story. He didn't imagine that there were 6,000 years separating them. It was could have been sooner. And Ratliff actually draws a connection between these wargs and some of the wolves that accompany Sauron and Beren and Luthien. He says, although Tolkien makes no explicit link in The Hobbit between the appearance of the wargs and the proximity of the Necromancer's Tower, any reader of the older tales and lays coming to The Hobbit for the first time would not be surprised to find wolf packs allied with goblins prowling about near any refuge of the Necromancer.
Yeah. Totally makes sense.
And we saw that Sauron was, a lord of werewolves in the beginning of, in the First Age. He was the lord of werewolves, Morgoth's lieutenant. certainly werewolves, but also you must imagine that there were some regular wolves in his party company as well.
In fact, the Lord of the Rings tells us that. There's a quote that we discussed back in episode 32 that really should be brought into play here. I mean, the biggest section is what we just read about, or actually, and some of it's a little bit of what we'll read, but mostly it's what we just read that describes that describes the wargs. But there's a passage in Book 2, Chapter 1, Many Meetings. So Gandalf's talking to Frodo after he wakes up in Rivendell. Frodo's talking about him about how do these black horses endure the ring wraiths, because all the other animals run away. Gandalf's answer is very interesting. It's very revealing. He says, because these horses are born and bred to the service of the Dark Lord in Mordor. Not all his servants and chattels are wraiths. There are orcs and trolls. There are wargs and werewolves. And there have been and still are many men, warriors and kings, and so on. What we get there is a distinction between wargs and werewolves. That's key, because you combine that with what we have here. So we've got a distinction between wargs and werewolves. Wolves are not mentioned separately. But then we have the quote that we just talked about from Hobbit.
That the wargs are what
ties the wolves to the wargs, right?
Right. The evil wolves over the edge of the wild are named wargs.
Exactly. So what we basically have is the wargs are a subset of wolves that meet two criteria beyond being wolves. Right. One is a geographical qualification, that they live over the edge of the wild, and the other is their nature, that they're evil wolves.
Right.
So if they're evil...
We actually created a really cool
Venn
diagram of this, which I think we'll have to pull back out. And
I think we will. We'll have to put
notes.
that on show notes and on social media just for kicks and giggles.
But you saw that wargs were a subset of wolves.
Absolutely.
All wargs are wolves, but not all wolves are wargs.
That's correct.
And werewolves were a separate circle off to the side, because werewolves are really something different, as we see in the Silmarillion.
They really are. Right. There's something very, drastically different.
And as that quote from Lord of the Rings implies, that wargs and werewolves are two separate things.
Because especially when you see it in that context, he not only says, not all his servants are chattels and wraiths. I'm sorry, not all his servants and chattels are wraiths. There are orcs and trolls. There are wargs and werewolves. We know that orcs and trolls are not directly related. Trolls are closer to giants than they are to orcs.
Right.
So,
if that passage had been something like orcs and goblins, then maybe there would be some question, because we know that there's relationship there.
That's exactly what I was thinking. If it was there are orcs and goblins, there are wargs and werewolves, then you'd say, wow, maybe there's not much of a difference between wargs and werewolves. Right. But the fact that orcs are to trolls as wargs are to werewolves, I feel like I'm taking the SAT. I just see a little
colon, the analogy colon. As wargs, colon.
Oh man,
werewolves. I think you're right. So wargs, there is intelligence there, as we discussed, but they're not. But they're still wolves. They're still animals.
They're animals with some extra. I mean, they even let the goblins ride them, as we'll find out in the next episode.
Yeah, but they're not quite domesticated, are they? I mean, I think we'll see that they really, it's not that they belong to the goblins, far from it, actually. They have an alliance with the goblins.
Yes, exactly. So well worth taking that brief sidebar. Actually, I think you had something else you wanted to point out, because what did the evil wolves are named? Evil's a key word, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think in a couple of times in some of his letters, Tolkien actually called wargs demonic.
Yeah.
He said, let's see, there was the letter to... Love this. Letter to Gene Wolfe in 1966.
Yes.
And he talks about the word warg and how he came up with this word.
Yeah.
He says, it is an old word for wolf, which also had the sense of an outlaw or hunted criminal. This is its usual sense in surviving texts.
Right.
I adopted the word, which had a good sound for the meaning, as a name for this particular brand of demonic wolf in the story.
Ooh. I love that line, though, by the way. I adopted the word which had a good sound for the meaning. That's so Tolkien right there.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about his
all about
relationship
sound
between
symbolism.
sound and meaning. Yeah, absolutely.
And then there was another letter, 297. There's a footnote in that where he says that the word warg used in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings for an evil breed of demonic wolves is not supposed to be Anglo-Saxon specifically. And he goes on to talk about how it's given this Germanic form, etc. But again, he references them as demonic wolves.
Right. Yeah. And I think, we discussed this back in that episode 32. I mean, Tolkien's use of demonic here is really descriptive and figurative. He's not saying that wargs are
like
literally
by...
demons or fallen Maiar.
Yeah.
That would probably be werewolves.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think.
We see how werewolves are creatures that have a true evil spirit in them. Wargs aren't. They're not up there. They're not that high on. They're not that high on the food chain. They're not that high on the
alpha predator here.
The evilometer.
The evilometer.
I'm going to make that a word. The evilometer.
Evilometer.
They're just
That's
not.
hilarious.
They're not there. They're demonic in the sense that they're evil and that they work with demonic creatures or demon-like creatures like goblins and orcs and Sauron. But they're not literally demonic.
No. My goodness. Well, that's going to be a fun chapter to finish up next week. We'll pick it up right there. But in the meantime, that was a great discussion. Folks, please be sure to join us again next time, and you'll find out more about the wargs and what they're doing there.
And we'll get a very fun but kind of gruesome goblin song that I can't promise not to sing.
I can promise you won't sing it.
Oh, come on.
I kid.
Come on.
If you sing it, can you sing it to the tune of Light My Fire by the Doors? Or maybe Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis? I don't know.
That's a good one.
Oh, man.
That'd be fun.
Just a big thanks to our Patreon family who's made these weekly efforts possible. And again, as we usually do, we want to ask you to take a minute to consider joining that family, the fellowship of the podcast at patreon.com/prancingponypod, if you think we've earned your support. Sean and I do sink several hours into each and every episode, and while we are happy to do it, we really are grateful for the resources that you provide. I mean, it really does help us make the show better. And thanks again to the Patreon family that we've been able to make that move to weekly. But, we have a big goal coming up. We'd really like to be able to attend a moot and do an episode from a place like that. Do it maybe even live if we can pull that off. Cool. Talk to people who are there and really just give you guys an experience that you can't have unless you go. But we can give it to you directly. So, we'd really like to be able to do that. We'll need your help to do that. But of course, we don't want it to be all about us. So we have some really cool rewards too, swag and cool stuff, but also exclusive content.
Exclusive content, and that's where we have a lot of fun. We've got our postscripts to each episode. As we've said, before, most of you I think know, we record episodes a couple of weeks in advance, and after we record them, but before we release them, we listen to them and we just kind of see if there are any jokes that fell through the cracks or topics we wanted to go into a little bit further. Looking back at the first edition to see if there's anything about Gandalf's fire and lights in there. Anything that we wish we had spent a little more time on or prepared for a little bit more. We put that stuff in a short postscript, usually about 10 minutes long, and those are available to our Patreon supporters on a special feed.
That's right. And that exclusive postscript usually releases the same day as the episode it follows. So if you want access to that bonus and others, be sure to join the Fellowship of the Podcast. And again, we also want to give a very special shout out to our patron at the Kierdan's contribution tier, Jason in British Columbia. Personalized shout outs are, after all, one of our available rewards.
That's right. And while your support is really appreciated, we don't want you to feel obligated. Only if you can afford it, and only if you think we've earned it, do we want you to consider signing up. Otherwise, just keep listening to the podcast, keep enjoying it for free, because we'll keep making it, and we'll keep making it available for free.
Absolutely. Sean, does Barnabas have anything in his bag for us this time?
He does. We've got 2 questions from Tom G. in Weymouth, Massachusetts today.
Wow, 2 questions.
Yeah, Tom actually sent in a couple of unrelated questions a few weeks apart.
Oh, wow.
And I, just purely by accident, I slated both of them for this episode. I was just kind of going through and thinking like, oh, this one, and I realized they were both from the same person. So, Tom, this mailbag segment is all yours. First of all, because we finally reunited Bilbo with his dwarvish friends in this episode, and because they're about to get into a pretty big fight, here's a question about dwarvish... Are you doing reunited again?
Yeah, I did. Sorry. I couldn't help it.
Man, that threw me, I'll admit.
I know. I try to do that. It's fun.
So because the dwarves are here and they're about to get into a fight, here's a question about dwarvish weapons. Tom says, the dwarven battle cry is Baruch Kazad, Kazad Aimenu, or translated in Appendix F to Axes of the dwarves are upon you. Why are the dwarves famed for their use of axes? This is not a logical weapon for a folk who spend their time underground. It requires room to use it. It's ineffective without swinging room. doesn't allow for the establishment of a shield wall, and doesn't improve the already limited reach of the dwarves. What practical or historical event led this to be the cultural weapon of the dwarves? A reasonable question. It's exactly the kind of question we can expect that Tolkien doesn't explain his rationale behind.
Well, yeah.
So we're going to have to speculate. It's interesting. First thing I did, of course, was start doing a word search for axe in all of my ebooks. And, in the text of The Hobbit, so far, the dwarves that we've been spending time with don't really have any weapons on them at all.
No.
The first few times axes appear in the story, they're either in the hands of goblins or Beorn, which I think is interesting. But Thorin does pick up an axe at the end. In the hoard under the mountain, he recovers a silver-hafted axe in a belt crusted with scarlet stones. Clearly some sort of royal heirloom. And he does wield that axe in the Battle of Five Armies. Of course, Gimli wields an axe in Lord of the Rings. In the Silmarillion, we saw dwarves wield axes at the Near-Ninth Arnoediad. So there's definitely a strong association there, even beyond just the battle cry itself.
Yeah.
I think that the dwarves' preference for axes actually does make sense for two reasons. First of all, dwarves don't seem to have a professional army. The way dwarves are, the way their society is structured, their army seems more like a militia. They do civilian work in peacetime, usually mining or smithing, and then when there's a war, they get called up for service.
Sure. Yeah, they probably don't have standing armies.
Right, exactly. They don't have a standing army. And what do we know about militias? Well, they tend to use whatever weapons they have because they have to supply their own weapons. They're not professional soldiers, so they don't have standard issue weapons or armor or any other gear. We can probably assume that early on, this sort of dwarvish militia would have gravitated towards the kinds of weapons that they would have used as tools during peacetime. Hammers that they would use for smith work and axes that they would use to cut down trees to fuel the forges.
What about I don't even know how to describe them, some sort of anti-arrow artillery that would then wipe out just a bunch of elves in front of Erebor?
Oh man, I don't want to think about that.
I'm sorry, that's a film reference, but
yes.
That
made me very sad.
That made me cringe. That made me cringe so badly.
Yeah,
very clever. I mean, okay.
It looks cool.
Visual. Okay.
Yeah.
So, we know that dwarves and axes they were just destined to go hand in hand. I mean, one of our favorite quotes goes all the way back to chapter 2 of the Silmarillion, and which is, I think I've said this 1,000 times, one of my favorite chapters in all the Legendarium.
Oh, yeah.
When Aule said to Yavanna, "Nonetheless, they will have need of wood."
Yes,
So,
I know.
there's definitely that cutting down trees thing. Now, you said you had two reasons. What's the other one?
Well, this is where, my lack of actual melee experience is probably going to limit me, but
Thank goodness.
I know. I've never done any kind of you don't
do the war recreations
SCA or any kind of live action role play or anything like that. But I assume that, Tom mentions the limited reach of the dwarves, but I would actually assume that a shorter, stockier warrior could probably do more damage with a heavy swinging weapon like an axe rather than, something like a sword. You're stabbing and slashing.
Yeah,
and
pointy little thing.
With a sword, I think, the opponent with more reach has the advantage, don't they?
I would imagine, yeah.
I would think.
If the swords are of equal length, I'm thinking the spearman has an advantage over the swordsman. But
that's a good point, yeah. But I think, compared to other kind of more close quarters weapons like a sword, I think an axe might actually be better for them because, they don't have to be that accurate. They can just swing and they can rely on their own weight and their own stockiness to kind of put power behind that axe. I would imagine it's probably
strong.
I imagine it's probably very effective in their hands in the right conditions.
Sure.
Now, Tom does make a point about axes, not being effective underground because there's no swinging room, but I kind of think dwarves did most of their fighting outdoors. I mean, they seem to have trusted to their magic doors to keep enemies out of their caves, and I think they did most of their fighting out in the open where they actually did have swinging rooms. So I don't know. I think that
I think there's probably some battles in Moria but they weren't expected. I think you're right that for the most part they would plan at least that their fighting would not be in their mountain kingdoms.
Yeah.
And I think you're on the right track when you mention militia. I mean, axes are both cheaper and easier to make than swords. And that's more likely to be available to that common soldier, to the soldier who has to perform, two tasks. They're also easier to wield, and by that I mean it just takes less skill and training to use an axe effectively in battle, as opposed to a sword or even a spear. Tactically, they can be quite effective in splitting wooden shields. I would imagine maybe more so than a sword. I mean, again, a sword's more of a pointy thing. I mean, you're going to slash too, and it's going to have that force, but it's not going to have that massive cutting force that
wedge,
an
that
axe
big wedge
is going to have, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's going to be able to split a wooden shield more effectively than just about anything. I also can't help wondering, and this is purely speculative, but dwarves have wielded axes in legend long before Tolkien came along. And I'm wondering if they're depicted that way because the origin of mythological dwarves is Norse. And the Norse and Viking cultures utilized axes in great numbers. Again, mostly because of the cost of swords. The fact that they didn't have standing armies.
Armies either. Yeah,
they're
were kind of
farmers and
well.
hunters and merchants all would gather together and go on a raid and get their goodies and come back.
Right.
So, a lot of them carried axes because swords were much more expensive. And they tended to be wielded only by the wealthiest of warriors or even the earls. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
I think that's probably where we'd get that from. But I can't help but wonder whether maybe it's just that Norse
cultural connection. Yeah. That link back to the inspiration.
I agree. So that was a fun question. I hope the other one that we got from Tom is just as fun.
It is another good one. So this one's actually a little bit more directly related to today's discussion because it talks a little bit about wargs and werewolves.
Oh, okay.
Back in episode 48, Alan, you talked a little bit about weregild because we were talking about
the weregild,
Isildur and the Gladdenfields, and you mentioned this word weregild, which is basically the man price. In fact, that's literally what it means in Old English. It was this sort of a restitution paid to the family of someone who was murdered.
Yeah,
and you mentioned the etymology in that were means man in Old English, and then gild would mean payment or yield.
Right.
And after hearing that, Tom wrote in asking, if were means man, were the werewolves of Sauron of the First Age the twisted fell spirits of men? Could this be the connection that gives wargs speech? So, I mean, I could see where he gets the idea.
Yeah,
from that where. I'm going to say, and I don't think this will be a surprise to anybody who just listened to the conversation we had 10 minutes ago, but I'm going to say I don't think so because werewolves and wargs are two different types of creatures. I think for werewolves themselves, I think Tolkien just used that word because it's a word that his readers would be familiar with for, a kind of sentient wolf creature. I think the idea is that they're more like man-like wolves as opposed to literal man-wolves. I mean, we have to consider, did Morgoth or Sauron even have access to, the spirits of evil men? And I don't think they did.
They did not.
When elves die, we know that their spirits are bound to Arda.
Yeah.
They get the summons to Mandos. They can be counter-summoned by Morgoth. We've talked about all this stuff before.
Right.
But the point is that they remain in Arda so that a Dark Lord could get them, could get to them somehow. Men don't do that. We know that when men die, this is going all the way back to episode 10, their spirits go beyond the circles of the world. That's what Iluvatar intended.
That's right.
And we know that none of the Ainur could change something that was part of Iluvatar's design. So I don't think that Morgoth or Sauron, I know that Morgoth or Sauron would not have been able to keep men's souls. Even the wickedest, most evil men out there.
No.
They wouldn't have been able to keep them in Arda to place them into wolf bodies. I mean, that doesn't mean that he didn't involve men in the breeding of werewolves in some way, which I'd rather not think about.
Wow.
But I guess I just went there.
Really vile.
Yeah. I mean, and there is some stuff in some of Tolkien's writings that, suggests this could have been a possibility. But but if we're talking about spirits trapped in bodies, I would think it would either have to be elves or something else, not men. But I don't know. What do you think? You've done quite a bit of research on this too.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've not studied werewolves outside of Tolkien, but I really did some studying on back when we had the Beren and Luthien chapters, and I can completely concur. The were here is just like it's it's like you said, it's intended to mean man-like, not actual man. I know that in our popular culture, a werewolf is a man who turns into a wolf, and therefore that werewolf is a literal meaning. But that's not how Tolkien used this.
Right.
In this case, we're just talking about a wolf that has, full sentience, that has, a man-like characteristics. But the point you brought up, which was the first thing that popped to my head, is the fact that the spirits of men that go beyond the circles of the world, that's solid. I mean, that can't change. That's exactly what Tolkien said from the get-go. So once a man is dead, his spirit departs Arda for wherever it is that Iluvatar is determined. Now, that brings up questions about the undead nature of the Nazgul. You talked about, the wickedest men. I mean, there are 9 of them that I can think of, but they're not dead. They're undead, and there's a difference. Right. They've been wraithified. Right. If you're going to make evilometer a word, I can make wraithified a word.
You can make wraithified a word. I like it.
They've been wraithified, and but
they're not quite dead.
Right.
I'll double down. They're only mostly dead.
They're only mostly dead. I knew you were going there. And we'll obviously have that discussion about the undead nature of the Nazgul. Oh, I don't know, in a couple of years.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Actually, I think we get to talk about him a little bit earlier.
We might get to talk about him a little bit in Fellowship.
Yeah. So we'll spend some time there. So, good stuff.
Well, that will be a fun one, and
will it?
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
I think we're both right on the same page here. So, some great questions there, Tom. Thank you very much.
They are, even if we didn't answer the second one the way you would have liked.
yeah, but some good food for thought, and we always like that.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, thank you very much for joining us.
And join us again next time when we finish Chapter 6 with Gandalf's explosive pine cones. And something else. Someone's coming. I can't think of who's coming. Who's coming?
The Eagles!
Yay! I'm actually hoping for a Joe Walsh guitar solo on this one.
Oh, that would be awesome, but you might be disappointed. And as much as I like Joe, it was Bernie Ledden who gave the Eagles that early sound. Anyway, I digress.
Of course, you got to out Eagles nerd me on that one. Yep.
Well, all the best stuff was on those first couple of albums, but most of the best stuff. I digress. Anyway, after we wrap up Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire in episode 65, we have something very special coming your way: an interview with Professor Michael Drought. Professor Drought is a professor of English at Wheaton College and a noted Tolkien scholar. He's co-editor of the annual Tolkien Studies Journal, not to mention J.R.R. Tolkien, Beowulf and the Critics, and the J.R.R. Tolkien Encyclopedia, Scholarship and Critical Assessment. He's a busy man. We're looking forward to speaking to Professor Drought about Tolkien studies, about Beowulf, about his involvement with Lord of the Rings Online, and more.
And I am certain that conversation will not disappoint.
No, it will not.
And I can't say how much I'm looking forward to it. I hope you out there are looking forward to it too. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
It will be fun.
While you wait for it, if you'd like to show your appreciation by heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd be grateful for that. Mm-hmm. Those reviews help us get more visibility in iTunes, and that translates to more listeners, more questions, and more fantastic discussion in this growing Tolkien community.
Absolutely. And thanks to those of you who have, by the way. We do read every single one of them, and we really, really do appreciate all the nice things you say about us. They make us blush. Make sure you never miss an episode of the show by subscribing to our podcast if you haven't already through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. You can find us in just about every podcast directory. And check out the podcast app in iOS 11 as it supports our new season and episode tags. Keep them organized.
Yep, and we want to thank all of you who've become part of our social media family. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everyone could join, and that's why we have our online common room at Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast and on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod.
I'm impressed, Sean. You've gone at least 3 episodes without saying on the Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast.
I'm learning. I've been spending more time with younger people.
And on the Twitter. Well, one last thing as always, folks, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or your favorite ways to sneak up on a group of grumbling dwarves to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, our new email address. So take note, Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get him into our next episode. Well, an hour and a half is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.